So welcome. We'll do introductions before we get started. We'll start over in that corner with Kelly. Go around and then we'll get everyone who's on the screen.
Hi everyone, I'm Kelly Clark and I'm transportation planning here at Volcom.
Sure.
I'm Yes Newton, I'm the city manager.
Mike Haven, Fire Chief. Dan Peterson, right?
Brenda Moore with LCOG.
Sarah Maderi, Eugene City Manager.
Steve Moult, Springfield City Council.
Randy Groves, Eugene City Council.
Chief.
Bounce over to Rachel.
John Pollard, Eugene-Springfield Fire.
Chris Stewart, President, Local 51.
Neil Adati, Assistant City Manager at Springfield.
Christy Hammond, Assistant City Manager, Eugene.
Chris Hubble, Deputy Chief, Eugene-Springfield Fire.
Wonderful. And welcome, Councilor Rodley. We'll start with you.
Corey Rodley, she, her pronouns. I am a city councilor in Springfield representing Ward 3.
I'll go. Don Jarvis, Associate with AP Triton.
Like David.
I'm Dave Honey. I'm an associate with AP Triton as well.
Hi, I'm Stacy Maxwell, associate with AP Triton as well.
Okay. Chillin'.
Nathan Bell, City of Springfield Finance Director, and hello all.
All right. I think that's it. So thank you. Well, this is our 9th meeting, believe it or not. And as you know, we started off with a look at the current status of the consolidated or functional consolidation of the Eugene-Springfield Fire Department. And then we looked at some options. And the next step was to take a look at what would be the impacts of each one of those options, particularly the fiscal impacts. And we ran into a little bit of a bump. We wanted to make sure that the information that was being presented to the governance review panel and the city managers was information that could be explained and could be tied back to the numbers that the cities believed were correct. And so we wanted to make sure that that was the case. And so we took a step back and we took a break to make sure that the information that you were being presented would give you the information you needed in order to move forward. And so that is when the cities reached out to AP Triton and asked if they would take a look at what we were trying to accomplish here. And so, as you know, you've already met Dan and his team, and they've presented a little bit of the information before. They've reached out, talked to you about your concerns and your thoughts and your questions. And Dan is here today to present what they found from that effort and the feasibility study executive summary draft. And so with that, I will turn it over to Dan.
Great. Well, nice to be here in person today instead of online. That's always a little bit helpful to be able to talk through this. Like Brenda said, we are here to talk about those 5 issues that you wanted us to look at and figure out what the feasibility, the options, come up with ways that it could or couldn't work. In essence, we're looking at what does it look like to continue as is with maybe some minor modifications. What would it look like for one city to contract with another, form an IGE, form a fire district, or then dissolve the merger in those options. And what we'll walk through today is really a focus on governance structure, administrative staffing, functional considerations are all parts. My team, I've got a specialist in the facilities and in overarching, helping me look at the big picture with Don. David is the finance person for this project, and Stacy is the Oregon person on finance, who has great depth on PERS issues and tax laws and everything specific to Oregon. And then we have another person on the team who's more of our support to make that fit. We did start with a considerable amount of time talking to everybody. So when we were first here in person and then some follow-ups, we've talked to well over 50 people to try and learn what was good and what was not good, how things were working well, where the struggles were. And I can't say enough about the valuable information that we retrieved. And then we spent an enormous amount of time trying to make sure that we understood the current conditions before we were going to think about seeing what's really happening. And so that was that last time we were here, and we captured that. And that is a voluminous document that is in the full report, and no longer as important today, but it's there, right? The background for where we based it on. But that all helped us in moving through these other analysis by understanding what was working and where the concerns were. We're going to walk through this document that's on your desk, and starting really on that first page inside, we captured what we felt were the desired outcomes that were expressed by the stakeholders as for this to really work effectively, single governance and administration are achieved. Operational advantages of functional consolidation are retained. Oversight by the cities on service level policy financial issues is ensured. Financial impacts are manageable. ESF staff's experience is positive. The impact on city administration and support services is reduced, at least the inefficiencies. Financial, administrative, and service delivery is sustainable and achievable. Long-term planning for fire EMS is achievable. And then the recommendation could be implemented with a reasonable amount of time. So what we're going to walk through is each of the sections that we looked at, a little overview of what it is, and then kind of how we felt our findings were in these categories for each of these sessions. So as I talk about one category, when I'm done, I'll pause a bit. I'll give you kind of a summary view, and then I'll take any questions as we go through, or you can save them up and give them to me all at the end, totally wherever you feel comfortable with on that flow. The page 2 talks about just a couple of key things, is that the options are detailed in the full report extensively. This is an executive summary, but if you like financial tables, there are plenty in that document to kind of sort through and look at. And there's a lot of information in there, but we needed a document that could sum it up, right? So this is the executive summary. We want to highlight that the capacity of ESF to manage routine and significant emergencies is dramatic in having the number of resources that are on. And I don't think anybody disputed that in our conversations, right? It definitely allows for a more consistent response no matter what's going on, whether it's a major wind event or a couple of house fires. The movement of resources as one team is moving really well. In addition, that consolidation allowed the cities to collectively eliminate 11.25 administrative positions between 2010 and today. A few other positions have been added, but those positions eliminated still retain eliminated, which in today's wages and benefits is creating an annual cost reduction of about 2.5 million. Eugene is seeing about 1.2 of that, and Springfield about 1.3. That doesn't mean, and we'll talk about this later, that when we reestablish, if you were to reestablish a fire department, that all of those have to come back. It just means that that's the change. So there's been some really positive components. But some of the key challenges with today's model has to do with two separate city councils and city managers with differencing in delegated authority, and the ESF staff working in two different cities. Creates some complexity and inefficiencies that have been a struggle to work through. I definitely heard significant energy put behind both ESF and the city staff to streamline it, to make it better. And I think they've done probably 95%, maybe 98% of what they could do in this model to make that better. But these inefficiencies are occurring almost daily. And some of these inefficiencies, what should take 2 or 3 people on a personnel issue sometimes takes 5 or 6 from multiple cities. So those challenges occur. The moving into like page 3 is the first chart that we're going to walk through. And this current model does not provide a single governance. It doesn't even really provide a shared budget process. The operational advantages are definitely retained in this model. The cities retain oversight of their obligations in this model. Financial impacts for all of the options that keep ESF together. We are seeing the need for 5 additional administrative positions, and that runs about an estimated $900,000. And it's a deputy chief, a PIO, program specialist, program coordinator, and data analyst. Those would alleviate some of the challenges of working in a model the size of ESF in any of the options that we're going to walk through. And then we also believe that there could be potential increased costs for some of the city departments in this model to just manage the complexity that they face with ESF, that maybe they have not received that work for. The impact on the city administration, it's really just inefficient and complex compared to the other city departments. So when a problem or an issue comes in front of a city department and it's non-fire, they have a path to follow and a routine to take. When it becomes a fire issue, they often have to coordinate with the other city. And it's when they get together and work together, they do fine, but it's very different than the rest of the departments. And it does require more effort, especially in the HR issues that might involve a Springfield supervisor and a Eugene employee and a Springfield battalion chief. Those issues create risk management issues for both cities instead of just one. Sustainability, we found we don't feel that this is sustainable as is. We don't think that you could keep in this particular model administratively longer. Long-term planning, each city can plan long-term, but ESF fundamentally is unable to plan long-term as an organization. Time to implement, it's in place today. The only thing that would take time would be if there were a few minor modifications that would need to be implemented to help make it work a little bit better. Any questions on the findings for this particular option? Okay. One city providing service to another. This one starts on page 4. And simply put, it transitions the day-to-day operation and employment of staff to one city or the other. And you could add some collaboration between the city managers and particularly on key issues such as budgeting, strategic planning, standards of cover. But generally it's going to be run by one city or the other. Otherwise you wouldn't get those benefits. With this model, you do have single governance because of the contract. You do retain the operational advantages. The city providing the service would have more decision-making authority and influence over ESF than the other. I think there could be some really good energy to put behind coordinating and collaborating, but in the end, after a period of time, the city running the department would be really running the department, the fire department in that space. So I think that it would be minimized, but I think it would exist and continue over time to where the one city would predominantly be directing the actions of ESF. Financial wise, the same 5 additional positions we recommend in this option. The city selected to do the program, to do the support, obviously would have an impact in providing that service and would probably need some additional funding to provide service for a larger entity. And the city not providing would need to find what they might be able to right size in their support services. It's very likely that there's a few infrastructure costs that you can't change just because you lose a department, but you might be able to find some other right sizing. Most all of the city departments shared that they were already understaffed and underfunded for the task at hand. This conversation, this comment is more about being equally underfunded and understaffed at the end of the discussion. but the infrastructure can't just disappear. That is something that would be there. If Springfield provides the service and the employees were transferred to Springfield, the PERS costs and health costs are less in Springfield than Eugene. The ESF could see a $3.2 million reduction in cost. However, the movement of the Eugene firefighters over and potentially a transfer of the liability from PERS could affect all of the PERS rates in Springfield. And that would be an unknown until the actuaries were to do their evaluation of that. If Eugene provides the service, the health benefits and PERS retirement would be increased by an estimated 1.2 million to come over into Eugene City. And either city not providing health benefits has expressed a concern about the sustainability of their health plan without the fire department as a part of that particular plan. The staff experience, the administration would clearly be streamlined, and ESF staff would maintain the operational benefits of the functional coordination. The impact, again, the city taking on the responsibility would have to determine even if they can support a larger entity or not, right? That would have to be decided. And then the other one, back to that right sizing discussion of what they could change or reduce to reduce that load. Sustainability, if the one city selected determines it has the capacity, it could be sustainable long-term. It would be a simpler system. The option would improve long-term planning for ESF, but because it's an agreement and could be terminated, it doesn't actually make long-term planning solid. It makes it a little bit better, but not that much better for that end than what it is today. Time to implement, both cities would have to figure out the time to add capacity, adjust their cost in order to make that happen. And that's a bit of an unknown for us to be able to identify how long that would take. We didn't really want to ask the support staff to do an exercise like this unless that's a direction that the councils wanted to take. That would be a lot of effort to make that happen. But the key issues on this entire model for us was one city would have more influence, the ability to manage that admin workload, the increased cost if Eugene did the work, and the potential impact to PERS in Springfield. So those are some of our overarching concerns on the contract option. Any questions on this one? Okay. The establishing an intergovernmental entity through an IGA, simply put, it's a public body, municipal corporation, has the government powers and responsibilities that are provided by the cities through an intergovernmental agreement, but an IGE cannot levy taxes. So its funding source comes from the general funds or whatever resources the cities have to share in that space. We have a proposed member fee structure in the full budget that's fairly detailed, multiple pages on how to share equitably the cost and be transparent and evolve with both cities and allow even for engines that are on the border, 4 stations, as they cross borders in their first due area to assess each other fairly for that. So as the city grows along that border, that price point would change so that operations can go to work each day, not worrying about the political border of the of ESF. The options that flow in here, forming an IGE board with representatives from both councils along with the city managers provides a single governance model and administration for ESF in the model we're suggesting for an IGE. They retain the operational advantages that are currently there. Oversight, the cities maintain policy and financial oversight predominantly on the day-to-day issues through representation of the IGE board. But we're also recommending that the IGE board be considered more like a budget committee that prepares a draft budget that then gets presented to both councils with their particular line items. So the cities retain authority to approve the final ESF budget since it's their money that's being spent in this space. This one also has the 5 additional administrative positions for ESF proposed. The other issue is forming a new entity causes PERS to create a new PERS entity and establish a rate. PERS takes and decides that you have a choice between either the independent or the group rate. Either way, and they take the average of everybody in the independent to start you out and the average of everybody in the group to start you out. So the independent rate, when you combine all of ESF together, would save an estimated 4 million per year, probably for a couple of years until the actuarials get a chance to evaluate the new entity and establish a rate. We would estimate that rate would increase because of the transition of liabilities to the new entity and the actuarials that would be done. So we don't know that for sure. That's an actuarial decision that would be made by PERS. The group rate, the average group rate is higher, would actually cost an additional 630,000 a year in PERS rates if you went straight to the group rate. The positive thing from PERS is that if you go into PERS, you can start in the independent rate and you can at any time transition to the rate. Once you go to the pool rate, you cannot go back. And the pool rate is simply designed to insulate smaller agencies from spikes of experience that they might have in a workers' comp claim, an early retirement, or some other issue that in a really small group could dramatically impact. So there would have to be a discussion about that at some point.
And if you go in at the independent rate to start with, and then the actuarial study comes out and they're going to increase the cost, is there any retroactive liability?
No, you can move immediately, and they're doing their best to make that fit, right? And a couple of things about the PERS issue today is in September, they'll do a new rate structure that'll be published, and there'll be a new average rate, right? And there'll be a new Eugene rate. There'll be a new rate for Springfield. We also anticipate that with some of the changes in the legislature with an earlier retirement, I mean, probably everybody's rate will go up somewhere. You know, some nobody really knows exactly what that looks like, but that may be happening no matter what. So you could consider that the moving to the independent rate may be one-time savings of 4 million a year for a couple, and then wait to see what the actuarials do, right, in that space. Health insurance costs. Springfield has a lower cost for a health insurance plan. Both plans are good, and they're just for different people at different points of their life, in essence, in reviewing that. They're both good. It'd probably be a perfect option if employees could ever pick one or the other would be great, but I think that's a really difficult conversation to have at all. But if all employees are moved to Springfield, the estimated savings is about 1.3 million a year. Moving all of the employees to Eugene increases the cost by about 580,000 a year. And either city not selected has expressed a concern about the sustainability of their health plan without the firefighters part of it. None of that is validated, and we didn't want to go down that road far until later on when it's a bigger question. You know, some concern about losing grandfathering, losing a quantity, those are issues that could be addressed if this was one of the options chosen. The impact, the new IGE would have the opportunity to determine where they're going to receive their support services, right? They predominantly finance HR and IT. That process would be most likely each city would be asked, what would it take for you to support ESF? And then ESF could also determine what would it take for us to do that ourselves. And then the IG board, along with the councils, could make a decision on how the support services are managed. We're proposing at this time that facilities and apparatus maintenance and replacement retain with both cities. The facilities are hard fixed assets that will stay with the cities anyway, and the cities should be responsible for their capital maintenance on those issues. Apparatus and equipment, you're sharing a specification plan, you're sharing a procurement process. Both systems for maintenance are working reasonably well, and it's not a high priority to tackle that issue today. It'd be better to place that into the system for now and not make that anything you tackle immediately. Sustainability, once ESF is set and the cities have reached consensus, you would build out your sustainability as you went through the budget process, and you would determine those levels appropriately. Long-term planning, it helps a little bit with long-term planning if you can agree to a 10-year agreement, but realistically, you're going to have a termination clause in here. So with a termination clause would limit your ability to plan really long-term for ESF. The cities could still plan a little bit longer, but not individually for ESF. Time to implement. We anticipate it would take 12 to 18 months to work through all of the specifics. We have a pretty significant action item list that could be used for this, that you would have to walk through a few pieces at a time, right? Our really key issues on this is that you get a single governance and shared. And honestly, I think both cities would, Eugene may have a little more influence today because of the amount of support services that are being done by Eugene. This would help Springfield's placement and discussion because ESF would have a place to share the whole package with the elected officials and city managers at one time, instead of really John being asked to bring the two budgets together to see the picture of ESF. That picture would be there. So that is some value. It does require discussion on exactly how the vote works for governance. Are you equal? Does Eugene have one more body than Springfield or not? Key discussion that would have to be developed on this particular piece. The ability for ESF to provide the admin that works for them to do themselves and work with one city is a benefit. Concern of the city health plan sustainability, and a minimum of 2-year notice. Your current agreement is a 2-year of fiscal years, minimum of 2 years to separate this. Potentially, you might want to have a longer period of time. Any questions on this walkthrough? Okay, the fire district. Yes. Oh, I'm sorry.
I know, because I'm the head at the end of the table. I'm gonna have questions about this, and I assume that we're all gonna have questions about this one. Because what I'd really like to hear from, and it could be, I mean, it may not be in this meeting. I'd really like to just get a little bit more from our city staff, from our finance people and our city manager around those PERS and insurance pieces. Because I think those are going to be so key in the decision making. So I don't have questions about whether I understand it. I'm just like telegraphing that I think that's going to be some conversation to get into that a little bit more.
Okay. Moving into then a fire district. Obviously we know what that is. It's a form of local government. It's an independent entity with its own elected board and the ability to levy taxes. Walking through the desired outcomes, it does provide single governance. Both cities retain the operational advantages gained from functional consolidation. The initial estimate, minimal estimate tax rate for ESF would be at least $218 per thousand. And in order for this to be feasible at all, both cities would have to reduce their property tax collection by an equal amount to make that happen.
What does that mean?
So they would have to stop collecting 218 in your permanent tax.
Okay, then transfer to the fire district.
And then and you don't get to lower it, you just simply collect less. The state doesn't allow you to physically permanently lower your tax rate.
So that money would go to the district.
So the city would stop taxing and the fire district would start. The resident would see the same tax.
City's rate at that moment in time stay the same.
The city's rate stays the same, but you collect 218 less. And in Springfield, you could fold your levy into it and then drop to get to 218. Eliminate your levy, fold in lower your to an equivalent amount to 218. Right. One of the challenges here is that Springfield does have some compression. Eugene does not. The current fire levy is losing about 150,000 that they can't collect through tax compression today. And the loss of moving the fire levy out would impact other levies like the police levy. So the police would then, the compression will most likely stay about the same for the individual properties. It just gets shifted to other parties. It's still there. And so the compression makes this one a bigger challenge in Springfield. Eugene is not in compression, maybe a few properties, but not of any substantial number.
They have income from other sources.
Well, it's really just the tax rates. The tax rates aren't that different in average tax rates. The gap between assessed value and real market value is bigger in Eugene than it is in Springfield. And it's such a complicated issue because it's a per property issue. It's not like a citywide issue. It's per property. And a lot of that can depend on how the assessor goes about reassessing values of those properties. Forming the new district provides the same PERS opportunity that it would also be given a new entity rate. So that same issue between independent and pool rate applies. And the same ability to move from independent to pool one time is available. The ESF staff, it would clearly streamline and provide additional control for ESF staff of their world, their environment. Both cities would be able to right size, required really to right size their support service functions without the fire department, and whatever they can right size becomes savings to the cities, whatever that number might look like in that place. Sustainability, it's sustainable and provides a level of service consistent with existing growth and limitations. But if the fire district doesn't start with a decent tax rate, it will never keep up. And the 218 even proposed is strictly for today's resources being deployed, not another engine or a truck. That wouldn't make that happen. And the tax laws today struggle to keep up with the growth, right? You often are using the growth to maintain today's service because the 3% often isn't enough to do that. So starting low would be a challenge on this. And making it any higher increases the challenge of compression for Springfield. The long-term planning is definitely available to the fire department through a fire district because that becomes the long-term issue for it. Forming a fire district requires several steps: vote of the people, approval of the county, a lot of those steps that hit in there. The key issues from our viewpoint on a district is there are a number of positive things for the community between long-term, depth of service, those pieces. The compression in Springfield is an issue. And generally speaking, there were a number of council that expressed concern about not being involved in leading and guiding their fire department. So that becomes a political concern on the fire district option. Any questions on these?
We have a certain value, and right now we're applying property taxes against that. If we go to a fire district, which we probably apply taxes to that. How does that apply to the taxes we have right now?
To the taxes you have in your city. So if just take a typical home today, right? Their tax rate may be $18 1,000. They're gonna have $18 1,000 the next day. But now $2.18 of it will be the district, and there'll be $2.18 less from the city. Is that what your question relates to?
Will there be an added tax to cost them?
I was just gonna mention that I want to make sure Councilor Mo has his hand up.
Yeah.
Nathan has his hand up.
Oh, sorry.
Our finance.
Nathan knows everything.
Not quite
Yes.
everything. So Dan, I'm gonna take a little bit of issue with your understanding on the compression here for the city of Springfield. Because if the fire levy goes away, that's 38 cents less that is causing compression. We're fully aware of the compression. In fact, both of our levies are creating compression on each other because they each exist. If one went away, it would be less compression on the other. Additionally, there are things we could do if we've run the numbers at 218. If we were to collect 218 less, that would have no impact. We could actually move fire out of our budget, get rid of the levy. And I think we're, to the negative at most about $100,000, which is really nothing. So that would be favorable for us. And then lastly, the fact that our permit rate doesn't change, we could conceivably fold our police levy back into our permanent rate. So even though we decreased 218, we could stop doing the levy and increase it by 140. And then that would protect us entirely from compression. So there's a lot more nuance to this conversation, and I just want to put that out there.
And we've had a lot of discussion on that. I think we do have some fundamental disagreement on that. But I think that the dollar amount is the dollar amount that comes into that. And so if you pull 38 cents out of the levy and move it into the primary, then the remaining levies get hit heavier. If you pull the other levies out, then if there are no levies left, then it begins attacking the permanent tax rate. If you have the same amount, I think the concern is that you might protect the city of Springfield a little bit, but you'll impact the jail levy and you'll impact the compression still exists from our review and pieces of that.
Understand a little bit further. So we will have a fire district which will levy a property tax, correct?
If you
Okay.
If you accept
It'll be
218,
uniform over Eugene and Springfield both. And but it doesn't apply to our basic tax rate. It'd be over and above. It's going to be another tax, isn't it?
correct. So you would have to collect 218 less across in the city. You'd have to drop 218 to match whatever the fire district does to even out your collection and impact to the resident.
I guess my main concern is in the big picture is raising taxes so much that services that we provide now suddenly we get compressed or get a financial situation where we have to eliminate something. And I'm trying to keep that from happening the best I can.
Well, I think Nate is accurate that if you're spending close to that and you move that money over, the city might be okay depending on how much it can right size its support services. But you would have to drop that, or you're creating new cost for the residents, which would increase compression.
But just to clarify, the 218 model, you're moving it from one taxing authority and giving it to another, so it nets out.
It nets out.
Now I had another comment more than a question regarding the concern about support services. If we were to go to district model, that can be phased in however much time is needed to, I mean, it's not like it just has to day one start. The district could contract with the cities for service for a period of time to smooth out the transition, correct?
Yes. The district could choose whatever that board wanted to do. And that board would be made up of direct elected members from the community.
But the 218, sorry, I don't have
Minimal
my head,
number.
but the 218 does not include our HR, our ISD,
does.
it does? Okay.
Yes, yes.
So they have
But-
the money to contract back.
They would have the money potentially to contract back with you, but it doesn't necessarily cover what improving levels of service today.
That was
and-
my question is.
And it would be very difficult to, 218 is, I'm characterizing it as today's delivery. Not if you're behind today and you would need another engine or another ambulance or another cost, and you need to spend $4 million more on staffing, you would have to bring that into the model, and maybe then it would be more like 230. And then that would have to be an equivalent drop by the city.
It's really hard to have this discussion without knowing how you calculated the 218 and what that goes into. For instance, you're recommending an additional $900,000 in administrative support, which I don't deny is needed in the department, but is that rolled in? I mean,
That's in this, yeah.
It's
The
so-
spreadsheets are in detail in the main thing. I'm giving you the summary for it, but we captured the revenue that the ESF is generating today on their own. Like the ambulance transport, those other issues, the contracting with the neighboring districts and all of the expenses, and left the support services in as a number to start with. And then that number is divided amongst the value of the community for the taxation. It's a very rudimentary, simple, bare minimum, what it takes to continue service as is today.
I would just couple that, when we look across the state at our peer jurisdictions about our size, delivering a similar complexity of services. Kind of the average tax rate is between 260 and 275. We just saw in McKinsey Fire District this last May need to pass a $1.05 levy to provide some staffing out there, which brought them up to, I think, 260 as well. And so that's a space between what we have today and what we would need to be set for a positive future to address a really changing environment for our service delivery.
We as a team felt like, it's feasible, but it wasn't necessarily the best option that was on the table because of the compression issue and the really majority of the elected officials we talked with were really not comfortable with letting go of the fire department in their city.
I need to understand it the best I can.
Yeah, I totally get that. Yeah. And Stacy did the significant work on this issue for us. Stacy, did you want to add or share anything else on the tax issue?
No, I don't have anything additional to share, Dan, from what you've articulated. Not unless
Great.
anybody had a question, but
Thank you very much, Stacy. The next one was if those options are, don't demonstrate the value for each city, because now each city has to decide if there's value. And then can we find consensus together to keep offering what we all know is phenomenal service, but does it have the value and effort that it takes to get there? Then the discussion comes in, what does it look like to dissolve the functional merger? And with that, the single governance, that both cities would have governance administration for their fire department, so there would be single governance. The cities would not retain the benefit of the shared operational services. However, I'm sure that the operational protocols could be maintained, and on major incidents, things would work pretty good, but the day-to-day operations would separate with two different leadership teams, and it would be as good as mutual aid could provide. It would not be what it is today. And mutual aid is helpful and valuable, but it doesn't allow you to integrate the same way when you're not hiring, promoting, training identically throughout the system. Oversight by the city, each city has full oversight of their fire department. For financial impact, we looked at those initial 11.25 positions. And as a minimum, we recommend that Eugene would add 5 additional positions at an estimated cost of 1.1 million. And that's a deputy chief, a finance manager, battalion chief of training, battalion chief fire marshal, and a program specialist. The Springfield, we would recommend adding a minimum of 3 positions at an estimated cost of 800,000, which is a fire chief, a deputy chief, executive assistant. And that is thin, right? But it is enough that you could say that's the minimal needed to separate. And I think we also found that there's a lot of support services that Springfield has kind of allowed Eugene to pick up and manage. And Springfield would then have to re-ramp up some support service work to support their fire department that maybe they have not been doing as much. No one's taken anything over. It's been great collaboration and work together. It's naturally, some of that has shifted over time, and it would have to then be brought back. The staff experience, our take would be that, everybody in ESF today is designated, as either a Eugene or a Springfield employee. But from our discussions, very few want this to separate. And the number I was given at one point is probably less than 3% of the firefighters would like to see it separate. That's a key point. Long-term planning, both cities would be able to long-term plan for their city. That would be part of the change. We estimate to walk through action items to separate would take about 12 months, but the agreement that's in there today is it allows for 2 fiscal years to separate. So if both cities wanted to agree to something shorter, they could, but otherwise it would be a 2 fiscal year process. There was some discussion from Springfield that they felt like the Springfield firefighter wages were higher because of the merger. And we found that not to be true in our evaluation. We took the standard comparables that were there for Springfield and prior and looked at their Bend, for instance, is no longer a comparable. They're 140,000 population today in their service area. So take them out of that. The firefighters in our simple analysis that Stacy did were about 5.5% behind that comparable. Engineers were 7.48 and captains 1.8% behind. So it doesn't appear that the wages have inflated past Springfield's comparisons. Those are some of the core issues that you would have to deal with in the separation. Any questions on those? Okay, so from us, we felt like the intergovernmental entity hit the majority of the targets, not all of them, but the majority of the targets of the desired outcomes. It could be a feasible solution to the challenges that are faced. It can provide for some appropriate representation and decision-making power. You get to benefit from some annual cost reductions, even with the 5 additional administrative slots. You would enjoy a couple of years of savings in PERS, but then you don't know where it's going to land after that until the actuarials figure that out. With the model that we have today, that is one option, one way to look at it. You could have a dynamic process of sharing costs that allow you to be pretty clear on your money is staying in your city for the response. All ESF staff would then transition to the new entity. We've built some pretty significant action plans for this option, for dissolution, the ones that we felt were the best quality. But the biggest critical issue that we think has to be dealt with would be a discussion and a thought on defining the governance and how the voting would work between the two cities. If honestly, if you can't find some consensus there, it may be a key moment, right, for that. Also, while we talk about 12 to 18 months to implement, if it takes you longer than that, there's probably some challenges in this method of service delivery, right? In addition to the action items, we have three different ways to look at it. One is the action items relating to forming the IGA and creating the actual policy that comes around that. The second then is costing out what the final decisions were in building the IGA. And then the third set of action items are actually in how you would implement it. Looking at those become valuable, right? We can pass out a set of those just so you have them, and I'll kind of talk about it a bit. In closing though, that your capacity is fantastic, and the value of ESF in more depth of service is probably more important to continue than any. You shouldn't look at this necessarily as cost savings as much as quality of service and capacity of delivery to the community. Didn't find any of the other three options meeting enough of the valued outcomes to consider that a strong recommendation from us. It doesn't mean they couldn't be done. It just means they're not a strong recommendation from us. And as you look at these options, these implementations, these steps are done in order in our mind. And step one is really the work that establishes whether or not you can move forward on an IGA. It's not feasible to put all of these in front of people at first. You would grab a few of them. Maybe the first things to look at is governance and decide, can you come to consensus on that? Then the board of directors, do we like where this is at? Can we come to consensus on that? But just to give you some idea that this doesn't happen overnight. And until this is complete, ESF stays exactly as it is until you come through the whole process and make that decision if you choose to move into an IGE model. Yes.
Who has the authority to make that happen? City of Springfield, separate entities, Eugene, separate entity. Do our voters vote on it?
This is an agreement your cities have the power to make between each other. It's an IGA that you form it and you delegate authority to this. It does not require a vote of the people because they're not, for one, they're not directly collecting taxes. You're funding this model.
Through their taxes.
Through their taxes, but they've already elected people to represent them for the taxes.
They'll elect us out.
Yeah,
That's a joke.
Yeah, well, and I think that goes back to my first comment is that each city has to be sure this is workable for them.
Right.
You have to say, is this, I understand the value, I get the value. Is all of this worth it?
That's my concern. I need to know that our people know about this and support it.
Yeah. So now the report itself, we've kept this in draft form just in case you guys had some questions or needed some more things dragged in here, right? But the full report, a couple hundred pages with great detail for you to dig in if you want to dig in, right? And that will be available once we get the final, yes, we're good here on this executive summary, because that shifts some of the components of the full report. We've been in a draft mode with the full report now for several months, working back and forth, because what our interest is to make sure you have the information you need to make the best decision for your community. And we feel like we've been successful in putting this in front of you. And now it's time to think about what your next step is. And with that, I think I'll turn it back to the city managers maybe or to the group to.
Well,
see if there's
first,
any other questions.
before we get into discussion, I'd like to offer IAF an opportunity to speak.
Sure.
And we'll dive into questions and answers.
So Chrissy, we're president, International Association of Firefighters, lane professional. Once again, thank you. We're at meeting number 9 now. It seems like this is never ending. One thing I heard today is 3% of our membership probably could go back to the way things used to be. That might even be an over exaggeration at this point. Our members are fully invested in moving forward with this agency as a single entity. We're looking for a future. We're looking for one agency to lead us into the future. And right now, there are times where we wonder what our future looks like. Every time the budget comes around, we wonder what the budget's going to look like, what cuts are going to be needed, when can we expand, when can we add our resources that we've been begging for. There's a couple things that got thrown out there. There was time. This is going to take time. And so to follow that up is I would ask for some action that we start to make some decision, we move forward with this. Because if we're looking at 2 years down the road to make some of these happen, we need to make some decisions sooner rather than later. Because our membership is ready. We've been trying to keep them from leaving the agency and going to other agencies that have provided public futures for their employees. And so we're just really looking for the ability to hang on to our members, give us a future, please. And hopefully we can start moving forward in one direction. So thank you.
Comment. That was rather fatalistic, bordering on snarky.
Oh, I apologize.
So I would just say, you know, this functional consolidation occurred. It's the first, I mean, there was progressive
2010.
steps, but 2010. You know, we're in 2024 now. Sarah and I both started our positions around the same time. And we've been putting a lot of work on this. So I'd like you to put that in a little bit of a context and perspective. I think we've moved this issue further than other administrations. So just
Okay. Well, let's open it up for discussion, comments, questions. Are there things that you need that you didn't hear about today? Again, this is an executive summary. There is a very large report that is behind this that may answer questions about the details, but are there things that you were hoping to hear today that you didn't hear? Or we'll start around the table. Counselor Groves.
All right, well, jump in. No, I agree. I think we didn't have the information before to act. I think we are getting the information now, but there's still some things that need to be worked out and worked through. Yes, this has taken a long time, but I'll go back to 2006, 2007. We talked a long time. It took a long time to get to 2010 when we pulled the trigger on functional consolidation, which I think that's a good term for it, but we actually referred to functional consolidation differently back then. We had steps that we were trying to put, Chief Murphy and I were trying to put labels on, and we did the best we could. But then when we got to the point where start knitting this together, just remembering history. Fire chief was the first point of consolidation. There was one fire chief in both cities. I would change uniforms to go to the other city. And it was very inefficient, but it was an opportunity to start trying to make what became a great operation. And so bringing these pieces together, it took 6 years to knit the contract together. 6 years. And that was, people would say, well, it's taking too long back then. But the reality is it was complicated. I mean, the values of the two contracts were, I believe, less than 1% difference, or just over 1% difference. But we had incented in different directions. And that's a good indicator of looking at how Eugene Fire operated and Springfield Fire operated. We were good mutual aid partners, but when we got together, it's like bringing a second football team halfway through the first quarter. That's a good team, but you're running different plays and you have a whole different system. So you're crashing into each other. That's what mutual aid really is, unless you're using mutual aid to backfill your stations and take other calls. And we worked through all that, but that took up, shoot, to the day I retired, May 1st of 2016. So there, it wasn't even just 2010 when it started. It was really 2006 when Chief Murphy and I had our first discussion. That was the year I got appointed fire chief. And we first started off with getting rid of the hard boundaries because that wasn't serving our communities well. If you, depending on what side of the line you fell on, you were going to get a significantly longer response. And so that was the first thing we blurred out was the lines. And then we just started knitting these pieces together. But you think of all the things that had to happen. Joint contract, 6 years to make that happen. Joint training, joint hiring processes. Standardized equipment that took, well, I'm guessing we're probably just now to the point of having pretty much standardized equipment across the system. But we went a long time without that. But I kept looking through all the dollar and talking with Jack Snook, who was the first chief, and then Jeff Johnson after him. He said it took them 25 years till they had the cultures completely blended and everything was organized. So compared to that model, I think we've done pretty well. It's just getting these final steps. And the thing that we didn't know was how the finances, how we got from where we started to where we are today. And there's been enough change that was very complicated. And I just hats off to Dan and his team from AP Triton. They came in pretty short order. Were able to put Humpty Dumpty, put the pieces of shell together. So, you know, like an airplane crash, how it fit. And so we have a pretty good understanding. I think we've got a good roadmap here. I think we've got more than one viable solution here, depending on what the collective wants to do. But I'll also say, you know, going back to what you said, Councilor Mo, you know, what will the public get out of this? And I understand that perspective, but we've really been operating under an IGE all this time. And if you go out and try and talk to the public as I have, and you start talking about what we're trying to do here, they just look with their mouth open and go, huh? I thought that was all done. And it's like, well, the work that still needs to be done, you will not notice any difference to the response you get on the street. It's the same as it's going to be. But if we unknit this, just like we did before, we'll start doing this. Pretty soon, one city or the other will see, oh, I like this equipment better than that equipment. And oh, I like this procedure better than that one. And pretty soon we'll be two separate fire departments. You won't notice any change right at first, but 10, 15 years later, we'll be two distinctly different fire departments and the service will suffer on the street. So I'm personally committed as an elected official now to push for bringing it together in whatever form that is. And like I said, I see several here that are viable, but I agree with you, Dan. I think this is probably the cleanest place to go. So I'm looking forward to this. I'd like to see it go as fast as we can, but if we go too fast, we start making mistakes too. So this is about having a very cognitive process as we move forward. But the thing that really held us up was not having the numbers. So now that we have those, I think we can in a reasonable speed to get this wrapped up. That's my 2 cents.
Okay, thanks. Well, let's move to Councilor Rodley since she has her hand up and then we'll move back to the room.
Thank you. And I was gonna tease Counselor Groves. I think that was $2, not 2 cents. So and I absolutely agree with Counselor Groves that I think that making our united ESF stronger is key. I have heard and have, you know, understand where Counselor Mo is coming from. And I just want to echo that I think that that the average public, if we're not going to be asking them for more money and we're not taking this apart and redoing it, is not going to feel the difference. So they're not going to, it doesn't go to a vote. It's on us to come up with the best, most solid governance structure moving forward so that we ensure that people continue to have the service that they've come to expect and they don't feel the transitions. The transitions are going to be internal. And to our city manager's point, so much work has gone into this. Like I'm totally hearing the frustration of how much work has had to go into it and how slow it is also felt for the folks who have been paying attention to this. All of that is true. I know that when I started this, I think it was like 2 jobs ago that I was like, so just saying all of that stuff out loud and saying, yes, this has been slower than we thought. Yes, it has been really hard. And I appreciate all of the work that folks are doing to get us there. What I want to get into next, like, I feel like we need to just lean into finding out where folks are on the intergovernmental agreement, because we're gonna, like I think was pointed out, we're gonna have to really figure out what does that look like in terms of the structure and who gets a say and who sits where, and that could be potentially challenging. But the other piece that I mentioned earlier is because I've said from the beginning is, you know, I want our firefighters and our first responders to be well cared for. So I just want to know more about what is that going to look like in terms of the insurance and the PERS. I also don't want to impact either city. Those little lines about, you know, this could change the insurance. I mean, I think that's a big conversation because benefits are so important and could really just impact things. So I think for me, and also I don't want to get too into the weeds. So it's like I'm trying to balance that and being like, that's going to be part of my decision making, is I don't want to hurt one department to benefit another. And I want to just provide a really strong foundation for whatever the next version of this is. So that's where I'm at in terms of where I want to go next. And I don't want to slow it down. I really do feel like we need to really keep going before everybody gets so cranky and tired of working on this that they throw up their hands and we do something we regret. So that's where I want to go, is like, I want to, like, what does that governance structure look like? Who gets to say what and who's on it and who appoints who, and what's the balance? Because I think that's going to get to the concerns that I know you shared, that some folks have shared about, you know, having some say. For me, having a functional board or a governing board actually gives Springfield more say than we have had having just 1 or 2 reports a year and going through a budget process. Like, we haven't been involved in actually governing how ESF works in a really functional way for quite a while. So that's where I'd like to go next. I also was trying to take up my $2 too. So thank you.
All right, thank you. Move to Counselor Mo, and then I'd like to check in with the city managers.
Well, very much ask my question.
Okay.
And I'm looking for answers that I can tell our people that it's gonna cost the same, costs more. How do I justify that? And how much control our taxpayers in Springfield have over some of these decisions.
All right, we'll jump on the other side of the room.
I guess I'm thinking about, you know, just the average knowledge level. I mean, we're all steeped in this and we know government very well. I would venture to guess that the average person, most people have no concept of what different local governments do, especially. They just want to know that they're going to get the help when they need it. And I don't really think they care, honestly, if it's a city council or a board or anything, as long as people show up and they can have safe and reliable services. And I think our department provides very high quality services. So, you know, as long as they don't see too much disruption in that, I think we put a lot of, we wring our hands a little bit about power and control, which I think is a little short-sighted. I'll just put it there. I like to look way out. But I don't want to run for office, so that's on me. I guess the other part is, you know, Sarah and I are both very committed to this, and we have had conversations around that. I think, you know, I'm I'm a little curious about the response, at least I think I need to check in with my council about their feeling of not having administrative control. It's not necessarily a role of council. I think that there is probably the gap is more in the communication space. So I think that that's something that you need to differentiate, like what do you talk, what does that mean? What does that look like? How would that be different in your experience as counselors? And that's something I can commit to do. So I appreciate the work of this group, and I do agree with Councilor Riley. We do need to dig into more of the help and PERS implications.
Due to compression, I only get to have 2 cents now. I share a lot of what Nancy said. In fact, a lot of what all of you have said of questions I've had. I have not been as steeped in this as the table of assistant city managers in this group here and on the back wall, who have done a phenomenal job getting us to this place. So I haven't dug through all of your pieces, but it feels like to me that there's really only one solution that's not viable. Every one of them has different impacts. Every one of them is gonna, and there's not a solution that doesn't have a financial impact to both cities. It's hard for me to understand without getting into your spreadsheets. It's hard to understand how it's possible that you could create a third thing and a third governance structure and save money at the end of the day. That is the part I'm like, how does that work? How do we really save money on PERS and health rates? It feels like there's assumptions in there I just don't understand yet that I would need to be able to understand. I do want to get it done too. I don't want to stay in this space because the space we're in is actually the only option I think is not viable. It just feels like there's a lot of hidden costs. There's some explicit costs that are in a spreadsheet. There's the hidden costs that we're hearing from Chris and from others around just the drudge of like, are we ever going to get there yet? But I do have a really long range perspective on this. And so even to like address the Councilor Rodley's comment that you just responded to have the fire department that's still both cities' fire departments, but kind of now in this new intergovernmental entity is going to get a lot of, if you're really getting into the like administration and planning and all of that, there's so much more focus than you're giving to a police department or a library or, so I have some long range kind of cultural questions about how we get there and how both cities still have a good balance on all of that. I think you said that. And I feel like the ability to get into a lot of detail, we are going to have to get into a lot more details for me to be able to even understand, here's the path I would recommend. I always like the idea of the IGE. I do agree with Randy. We've been sort of operating in that without really operating in that. There's some pieces of that are very appealing. And then I have a lot of questions that I unfortunately peppered Dan with about an hour ago. So that we'll work through, but I'm very optimistic. It's really good work.
Chief, do you want to make any comments or ask any questions?
I've had a lot of my questions answered along the way. Dan and I have gone even closer through all this and trying to work through it. I mostly just want to acknowledge the work that's kind of gone into this space, particularly the back of the room with Christy and Neil and their assignments to lead through this effort. And really, I think they showed up a lot, as well as the support staff in both cities really showed up thinking about their space, the impact of their work, but with a lens of the fire department needs to land somewhere, which is, it is incredibly important. As we think about our long range plans and strategies, coming to some type of resolution on this is going to be important for us. Whatever that might look like, our job is to really be the best fire department that the community has, and this is the one we've been given to manage right now. But as we think about it's a very much a changing environment for all of your government, districts, cities, our two cities, and, you know, kind of managing this as we imagine revenues and service delivery and everything into the future is going to be a key component for us. And so I appreciate the continued work and support around that. Kind of allows us to ground a little bit more. It's a challenge, but we've got a bunch of great people that are doing the work, and I think that's why we're here 14 years later. Is that the folks out on the street are doing an amazing job. The community doesn't see how shorthanded they are, or how busy they've gotten. They just know that when they call for help, our people show up. We continue to seek opportunities to be innovative where we can within resources inside and outside the organization to help support that. So, and then last but not least, thanks to AP Triton for their work and digging in on this, and Brenda for helping facilitate this and sticking with us throughout the process. It's very much appreciated.
Okay, well, what I heard today was that you've heard all of these options before. We've just presented them to you in different ways. This was obviously a summary of a much larger report that has some really detailed information in it. But what I'm hearing is that you feel comfortable with the direction that this is going. You need a little bit more information about some of the details, the impacts, what does it exactly mean for a PERS savings in the first 2 years, and then what does it look like after that, and a little bit more explanation. And so does it feel like if we come back to you in an additional meeting with a little bit more of the meat for those questions, and they weren't really concerns that you raised, but comments that you had, does that feel like the next step to you?
We're gonna get a full report before council. It's a full document.
No, I'm not sure if the full report's gonna go to the council or not. That's
Should be available, I would think. Well, anyway. Lots of information.
Those things we need to be decided. Yeah.
So I wanted to, I have a lot of very granular and technical questions that I think are too much in the weeds for this group. And I think I would like to talk about with Sarah. And probably our assistant city managers, and maybe throw in a finance director or two. But I just, really, because there have been some, like, especially I'm thinking about, like, just as an example, right? If there's another entity and employees are hired under those entities, but yet they are somehow managed by each city, well then, there's different labor laws that apply, there's different, pay equity, there's all of these things that I just want to make sure that we understand, how that works. And also I have a very large interest in making sure that we're not duplicating internal services. If we're not able to achieve that, then it's not a deal breaker, but it weighs heavily on my mind, because I think it really does bother me, the inefficiencies and the work that goes into running the department. Chief Caven has been incredibly gracious about it, but we can only rely on that for so long.
Well, my intent is, and I sent the governance review panel members an email with my calendar. I'd like to debrief with you after this to get into a little bit more of your comments and your thoughts. So if you respond to that email, that would be really great. Sounds like some more in-depth conversations between the city managers and the assistant city managers that have been really in the weeds on this. And I would also like to give a shout out to Neil and Christy, who have been on this. They have really dug in. They've taken the charge seriously. They've asked all the right questions. And Dan, you've been really great to work with. So thank you. But I think we'll step back and take a look at everything that we heard today, the summary, and the information you've been provided. And then we'll figure out what the best next steps are, so that we really move this conversation and this issue forward What I don't want to have happen, I don't think anyone does, is for us to keep having the same conversation over and over again. Let's figure out a way to move this forward. Right, yeah. And make sure that the questions that you haven't even thought of yet, we get those answered to you before we figure out how we get to a point where some option or some way to address what we're facing right now is addressed. So does that sound good?
Yeah, I've had a
Yes.
question, I keep wanting to, in my style, I keep wanting to say, okay, let's just eliminate a couple of these and start narrowing. But every time I try to even do that for myself, I think when we get narrow, are we going to go, oh, actually, we kind of want to reconsider this other option. So it is really, I don't feel like I have enough yet to say this is definitely the way, but yeah.
Yeah, and so we need to figure out
Yeah.
what do you need so that you do feel comfortable
Yeah.
moving that forward.
I just want to say, I think we're just now getting the information that we've needed.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like the ODOT bridge report. It's going to take a while to sift through it to find out what it actually says and make sure we understand that. But I think we're going to I think we've got the information in place. I like the idea of the two city managers and CFOs getting together with the chief, maybe Brenda kind of drilling into some of this, because I don't think council or elected official level, my opinion, I don't think we need to get that deep in the weeds, but I'm going to feel much more assured if I'm seeing, our people or our management team shaking their head yes. So that's going to help. So none of us want to step off into the abyss without knowing where we're going to land.
How deep it is. Yeah,
Well,
we'll make sure that doesn't happen.
like living on the edge, but not on that.
Right, any other comments or questions? See why we have Dan here in the room?
Thank you.
Okay,